In this video, I want to talk about what I've been working on the last month, some upcoming content to the game, and something that's been a real challenge for me ongoing that I think a solution is now appearing at, and it's getting there. And that is the question, procedural versus designed content. And this has been underlying a lot of difficulties in terms of design, which is how much to have things purely like random and generated by an algorithm versus more designed custom experience. For most roguelikes, they are heavy, much heavier, I could say, in the procedural side. And by procedural, again, I just mean generated by an algorithm. So you can think of Minecraft as a great example. You've got, you've got some planning in that there is biomes and like the same, and the biomes are spread a certain way. But within those biomes, nothing is hand designed. It's an algorithm placing trees, placing, the creatures, placing all the ore, heavily procedural, heavily created by algorithms. Versus design content, you can think of a planned space where an artist or designer has gone through and set up certain experiences. And procedural works great for indie developers who can't design a ton of content. So instead, we design, elements that can be reused over and over. And then it's infinite. The problem with this, though, is the world can start to feel repetitive, and it can also be unbalanced. And for me, it's very hard to tell a story or create a certain experience. And more I've been thinking, there are certain themes I want to talk about through the game. There are certain ideas I want in the game. I want to create an experience. And I'm finding with a whole open world game, it's very hard to do that purely procedural. Mathematically, kind of algorithmically, there's something really cool. If the whole world is just following a rule set and like running by itself, that's awesome. And that's really where my vision was earlier on. But the more I've moved along in this project, the more I really wanted to create experiences, and I wanted them in a certain way. And I couldn't do that with procedural content. And okay, so I'll tell you where the solution is, where I'm heading for, and what that relates to. Okay, so just briefly, if we're on the procedural side, let's think we've got a dungeon type. Let's say castles. Okay, and castles are in the game already. And within that, we've got room types that can appear in the world. Furniture, traps, monsters, loot. Content. And this content, like I've said, is the great thing is it can be reused over and over and over. And basically make infinite number of dungeons. Okay, so the question is, we've got our content. How do we tell a story through this content? How do we create like a specific experience? How do I move this a little more over this way? How do I do a quest? And there are a few ways to do this. So one way, and some of the quests you can already see in the game is, well, you just have like a random room, like a quest room, or like a quest NPC that will sometimes appear in dungeons, and he just kind of fits in. And that's great. But what if you want a better story? What if you want a little more? What if there's a guy in this quest room and you want him to relate to the dungeon somehow? Like a specific monster attacked him, or his loot is somewhere in the dungeon. Well, suddenly you can't just shove this quest room into the dungeon anymore, because it needs to relate. It needs to tell a story. And this is where Elder Scrolls has been an inspiration for me. Elder Scrolls and the Fallout games, which I often reference, because they're a good example where what they do is they will have their content. And yes, the Elder Scrolls games, it is hand designed, but they do have certain content, and they'll reuse it over and over for dungeons, but each dungeon has an additional idea or theme or small story. And that's what moves it more into this designed space, you could say. And to give you an example, here I'm in a temple, and these temples are already in the game. They're built by this machinist factory, and they built these machines. These kind of magical constructs. So we're on a wide open floor, very difficult floor, where they're factory farming these crystals. Now, going with that idea of how can I make this a little more designed? How can I tell a story? How can I make it, if you've already seen one of these temples, the next one is slightly different? And the answer was adding that theme or that twist. So here, the story is, this temple's been infested by these bugs, these infused creatures. And these guys, they eat the crystals, and it powers them up and gives them abilities, and they build their nests everywhere, and they're just crawling all throughout this dungeon. And they'll even fight each other. So you're like the machines that run this factory are fighting the infestation. And why this is great is it's a few more assets, a few more creatures. We've got these nests and these new creatures and a few more pieces. And now that is added on top of what you could call the procedural content. So it's adding a bit of hand-designed, hand-picked things to give a story to this dungeon. And there is a quest in this dungeon. You can kind of find out more about why they're here and what's going on, and you can beat that quest. And it's kind of the quest for this dungeon. And moving forward, I think more and more that's going to be my plan. And it's what I've been doing for the last month is designing some of these dungeons to have a unique story or unique element. And in that way, I can create more of the experience I want to create for the player. I can have a challenge at the correct spot. I can have a really cool reward that's not appearing everywhere. It's in one place. And players who've played the game a lot can more plan their routes and get to know the dungeons and get to know the world, and even the lore will fit in a more sensible way. So that's what I've been thinking is, let me just get out of here, is sure, we're going to have random dungeons all over the world. Here we've got the temples on my screen. And there'll still be temples and whatnot and dungeon types, but I'm thinking as far as possible, the major dungeons will have a design. They'll have something unique or special about them. And that it won't be all dungeons. Like there can still be, if we go to say one of these little castles, there can still be like small little places where you can just farm and get loot and level up, and it's just like a few rooms. But the major areas, I'm thinking each faction will have a set of major areas, and they'll all have something designed. And this will help balance the game, I think, a lot, and not just waves of randomness. At some point, too, I would like to add provinces where, so like maybe you start in like a more friendlier forest area where there is typically content's a little easier. And then, I mean, we've all played fantasy games, but then the idea would be when you're ready or when later on you can move to a new biome, which would tend to be more difficult. So like the desert biome and the swamp biome and whatnot. But the last piece, which I'm really excited to reveal today, the last thing I wanted to talk about is the first major boss for the game, which is the Aeternum, and is this huge guy, and he is the final boss for the Temple faction. I'm thinking there'll be a small story or, well, a medium story for each of the factions, and typically a major boss at the end. You don't need to defeat the boss to beat the game, most likely. But you do if you want a reward. And also the quest just to take you through those dungeons of that faction. So Aeternum, huge guy, going to be extremely difficult. And not just pure stats. Maybe I'll do another video on boss design, but not just pure stats, not just like you need a certain amount of armor or you die. It's I'm hoping it'll be a longer fight where mobility will matter, where you're standing will matter, what's going on in the room matters, an actual difficult, longer fight. So hoping to have him in the next update. I wanted it at the end of this month. That's in like 2 days now, so probably it's being delayed. But I think worth the wait. He is going to be a serious boss, and I guess I said he was the first major boss, but really, I guess Morald is. But Morald is small potatoes compared to Aeternum. Morald, I'll probably have to loop around and give Morald an update. Morald needs some new abilities. That's what I think. But yeah, in short, that's what I've been working on, is hand designing some of these dungeons to give them more meaningful content, more quests that make sense, that take you through a bit of a story, that theme some of these places to be visited, and focusing this month on the Temple faction, these Temple dungeons, leading all the way to a new final boss, which is coming soon. Yeah, so I think that's about it for today. There's a lot I wanted to say. Sorry if it's kind of rambly. I mean, it's a dev blog, so what do you want? maybe the next video we'll talk more about Aeternum and boss design and philosophy behind some of this design. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching.